UFC 298 has concluded, and with it, we saw a new featherweight champion crowned in Ilia Topuria, and what a performance that he put on against Alexander Volkanovski. I said this in the prediction show that we did, the last podcast episode, but it just felt like this was Ilia's moment, right? The timing and everything was coming together, the trajectory that he was on, the guys he was finishing, and I had a conversation about this actually with Josh Fremd when he came onto the show. If you guys haven't seen the episode, make sure you check it out. But talking about how important that timing factor is. And if you look at guys like Tony Ferguson's one of the best examples of it, I think, where timing was just never on his side, right? Things never lined up for him to become the undisputed UFC lightweight champion. And I definitely think that there were moments throughout his career, like a 3 or 4 year stretch, where he maybe was the best lightweight on the planet, and we just never got to see him put into those situations. But Ilia Topuria's path to the title has been completely different. He's been starching everybody, and he's also moving up through a division that Volkanovski has already cleaned out. So there's a need to get these new challengers thrust into situations that maybe they wouldn't normally been in. I mean, granted, Ilia is here because of his performances, right? He's here because of the way he finished Bryce Mitchell, right? Of the way he knocked out guys like Jai Herbert. Josh Emmett just beat him via a dominant decision. He's here because of his skills. But my point is just that sometimes this is just the way it plays out. And it felt like, regardless of how skillful and all of the experience and all of that, all those things that were going in Volkanovski's favor, man, it just felt like Ilia's time. And you have to take into consideration, too, talking about the timing thing. Ilia said this leading up to the fight, and he was 100% right. This is the best time to fight Volkanovski. The time to fight Volk is not when he just defeated, say in a hypothetical world, he defeated Islam Makhachev and he's riding a ton of momentum. That is not when you want to catch him. You want to catch him coming off a knockout loss, knowing that you have power in your own hands, and you want to catch him on relatively a quick turnaround, right? And there's a lot of criticism that Volk, A, shouldn't have taken the Islam fight on short notice, but B, shouldn't have turned around this quickly against a power puncher like Ilia Topuria. And Volkanovski has already done enough for many people to cement himself as the greatest featherweight of all time, right? Especially, so much of Jose Aldo's work was done in like WEC and, not all of it was in the UFC, but the majority of Volkanovski's, his body of work has been in the UFC. And he, for that reason, I think by most people is considered the greatest featherweight of all time. And Ilia's win over him looked a lot. Say what you want. It's so reminiscent about how Conor came to the top. They both had 6 fights where they won their first 6 UFC fights in a row. Most of them via finish. I think all Conors were finishes, right? And I think Ilia might have a decision or two sprinkled in there. But they kept getting thrown these opponents, and you would keep asking the but he hasn't faced this type of guy, or Conor hasn't faced a wrestler, or Ilia has and they just kept proving the doubters wrong. And now Ilia is 15-0, 26 or 27 years old, young champion, right? And he's got the prime of his career coming up in front of him. I think he's a prospect to really be excited about. And just thinking about stylistically how the fight went down, right? It's like I mentioned earlier, I feel like Alex Volkanovski probably has more variety in his striking, right? He's able to mix things up a little bit better, right? He's really good at throwing feints, setting things up. He mixes his wrestling in. And in terms of fight IQ, it probably is higher than Ilia's. He's just had more experience. He's been through more situations, right? He's been through a lot more adversity, almost getting finished by Brian Ortega, right? That war that he got in with him. And Volk's battled through things. He beat Max Holloway 3 times. I mean, he's got a lot of time banked as a champion. But Ilia's style was just it's simplistic, but I don't mean to call it, it's not simple, but it's simplistic, right? Meaning he's just coming forward and he's boxing you. And he's throwing some leg kicks in there, but he's not really taking them to the body or up high. He just has really crisp combinations. He applies solid pressure, and he has a very solid wrestling and jiu-jitsu base to back it up, so it's hard to get him to the ground and change levels on him. And if you're going to sit there and exchange with him, His hands are lightning fast. He has serious knockout power, and you always have to be wary when you're getting into the pocket with this guy. I mean, he just, the first round you maybe could have given to Volkanovski, and Volk was finding success. I think he was stinging him a little bit with that jab, but it was never giving you the impression that he was going to be able to, he was like fending him off, right? It was more like throwing things out there, trying to keep this guy from pressuring into me, but it didn't feel like he really hit him with anything that made Ilia second guess about applying that forward pressure. And when he got the fight up against the cage, man, he showed that it just takes one. And it's crazy. It's a crazy sport just thinking about how good Volkanovski is, how he is 35 and probably near the tail end of his prime, but statistically, there's a crazy stat that I saw on Twitter. And actually, let me open it up because I want to give credit to the person who tweeted it. So I'm not just like blurring it out and acting as if I like uncovered this crazy data. But Aaron Bronstetter said that UFC fighters aged 35 and older fall to 1-22 in men's weight classes 170 and below in championship bouts. Disclaimer here is when they're fighting younger opponents. And then he says Tyron Woodley has wins over Darren Till, older, and Damian Maia younger when he was 35 plus. So that stat, you cannot ignore a statistic like that. And I don't know, the larger weight classes, it doesn't seem to matter. You can seem to age a little bit more, I don't want to say gracefully, but you can hang around a little bit longer in the sport, right? Because I think the body mechanics are a little bit slower as you move up, and you start to build that ring IQ, like that experience, and now you've got everything in your head, and you don't have to quite have the same reflexes that you had with the lighter weight divisions, where your technique and it has to be impeccable. And when you lose a step, man, it can snowball very quickly, right? And I think I know it was a non-championship bout, but I also think we saw that in the Merab versus Cejudo fight, which we're going to talk about more. But Ilia Topuria, like I said, what a performance. That's the other thing. I was talking to my wife Bethany about this before the fight. We were just talking about how she used to present for her job in marketing and how hard it would be to kind of deal with those nerves leading up to getting on a stage and presenting this product to a room full of people. Like the nerves that you feel doing something like that. Now compare that to fighting. And then also thinking about like if you are the headliner, you're waiting and watching. All these fights are happening underneath you, and you're getting ready at the hotel, and then you're arriving, and you're trying to stay in a good place mentally, right, the entire time, and to control those nerves and emotions and manage all that and put it all together on fight night. That is where Volk has been in the fire. That is where Volk has been here. He's done it before. He knows he has a process down. He's handled this type of pressure. And like I said, he's dealt with adversity in title fights. And Ilia is having to do that for the first time, really. I mean, he had a main event against Josh Emmett, but it's not the same thing as a title fight, right? And the way that he handled it, he looked so composed. He just kept with his game plan, kept marching forward, and landed that shot. And I think that this is going to open up the featherweight division a little bit more. And you've got a matchup coming up this weekend between Brian Ortega and Yair Rodriguez. And man, Volkanovski, if anybody deserves an immediate rematch, it's him. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying the way he got finished, the fact that he's riding a 2-fight losing skid, and both of those were finishes, bad knockout losses in a row. Do you want to feed him to Ilia again? I don't want to say feed because Volkanovski always has a chance, but even let's say you give him 6 months, do you want to put him, even if you're just a promotion and thinking about like maybe Volkanovski can get back to the title, give it a final go when he gets to like 37? I don't know. But do you want to feed him a guy like Ilia who does have that knockout power? Or do you want to give him a more winnable fight against someone else in the division and let Ortega and Yair start to move this thing along? And I think that, Ilia, now we're getting, if we are in the Ilia era, if we truly are, we are going to have to see him deal with different styles. And I'll tell you what, whoever comes out on top in that fight between Yair Rodriguez and Brian Ortega, let's say it's Yair, for example, Ilia got stung and hurt by Jai Herbert, a long, lengthy guy. And man, nobody throws kicks from different. Like, nobody throws kicks like Yair Rodriguez. That motherfucker is unpredictable. He's long, he's lengthy, he's explosive, and I think he's a way better opponent than Jai Herbert. So it's like, can Ilia start to deal with these problems that start coming up in the featherweight division? And then if Volk can get back into the title picture, fine. But when you get definitively finished like that, especially considering how he lost to Makhachev, personally, again, it's like, I feel like, not to be critical, but in hindsight is always 2020. But I feel like Volk has made two bad career decisions, like not even in terms of his fighting ability, right? Or mistakes in the octagon. It's like mistakes in taking these fights, like taking the fight with Islam on short notice and then not giving yourself adequate time to rebound and recover before fighting a dangerous power puncher in Ilia. It's like, I understand the confidence and the perspective, but you also, I think, have to be able to sit back and look at things objectively. And I think that Volk needs to do that next. I think it's very important that he takes a fight against a guy that he can beat and probably a guy who doesn't present some sort of insane knockout power, right? Like if I pull up the rankings for the 145-pound division, maybe, he's already, the problem too is that he's already beat so many of these guys. But I'll tell you a fight that I don't fucking hate is Movsar Evloev. Evloev is dangerous, right? But he's coming off that win over Arnold Allen. Allen is Allen is a power puncher, right? If I'm Alex Volkanovski, I just don't want to lay that chance on him. And not that Movsar cannot catch you, not that his striking is not very good, but it would be interesting to see that matchup, and it's a guy moving up through the division that's trying to prove that he's ready for the title shot. So I really like that fight. I think, again, it keeps Volkanovski away from guys with like big punching power, right? If you're managing him or you're managing your own career and pretending to be Volk and looking at it, but we'll see. We'll see, right? I think that makes sense. And then I think, like I said, you let the winner of Ortega and Yair fight Ilia Topuria for the next shot, right? It's funny, too, because you hear Sean O'Malley mention Ilia's name and wants to fight him. But you can't deny Merab anymore after the performance he had against Cejudo. And this is a good chance to segue into that. So in the first round, things kind of played out how I thought they might. Like, I kind of thought that Cejudo was going to be able to stuff some of the takedowns and get off on the striking just because I thought he was cleaner. But to wear Cejudo down the way Merab did and take over in the second and third and then be taking him down at will, carrying him across the octagon. I saw a funny tweet that said, like, this is the equivalent of getting dunked on. Carrying Cejudo across the octagon and slamming him. Again, the age thing coming into play here, but I think that Merab's pressure is fucking legendary. Like, he wore Cejudo down, and you could see, like, regardless of the great first round, I mean, Cejudo hurt Merab in that first round. And regardless of the first round that he had, he couldn't maintain that consistency. And when he started to fade just a little bit, Merab just pounced. And the consistency and just stuck with the game plan again and ran through Cejudo. Like, Cejudo couldn't keep up the level of output that he needed to keep Merab off him. And that's what it boiled down to. And Merab just wears through people. And if you're Sean O'Malley, it's hard probably to not look at that fight and watch that fight and start thinking ahead a little bit, right? Because you got Chito Vera coming up, but in Sean O'Malley's mind, like, both of these guys have got to know that this guy's waiting in the wings and that this is what you got to get ready for. Like I said, Ilia just won the belt at featherweight. I think he has to defend at featherweight. I think O'Malley has to successfully defend against Chito, and Merab has made too much of a statement for him to just hop off into another division, right? So I think, again, it's a business, though. Like, at the end of the day, if O'Malley and Ilia want to fight and it's going to make a ton of money and they both win, like, let's say their next fight, I don't fucking know. Or let's say Sean wins in spectacular fashion. The industry is going to do what makes the money, but I think that Sean's got to defend against Merab because I also feel like Sean O'Malley got to kind of cherry pick his first title defense. A lot of guys don't get to do that. I don't want to say most, but like a lot of guys don't get to do that. And it seems like if he was fighting the true contender, he would be fighting Sandhagen or Merab at this point. But instead, he's fighting Chito Vera, right, who's ranked number 6 right now, and basically avenging a loss early in his career, and that kind of allowed Chito to shortcut the line. I got no problem with it. Like I said, it's whatever makes money. He's calling the shots. But I think before you go off to another division to fight a guy like Ilia, you gotta defend against Merab and prove that Merab's not the guy who maybe should be moving up and fighting. You know what I mean? Like, you shouldn't. It's what Merab has accomplished. It's about not denying him his right and his chance at stardom and his chance to make these things happen. And again, if you're O'Malley, you probably don't want to navigate it that way. You probably do want to go start fucking Cheeto and then be like, let's fucking do me and Ilia in Spain. And you make that statement, especially if he finishes Cheeto definitively. Like, that's the push he might end up making. And I'm not saying it should, I don't know. I feel like personally, they should stick within their divisions and build this super fight. But the timing thing, it might be ripe. I don't know. But Merab really fucking, another interesting thing was that people were upset that Henry Cejudo didn't get his mic time after the fight. I'll tell you what, you're talking about a guy who, whether he real fired his coach and then rehired him back after he got backlash, or whether he really just fake fired his coach on camera, you are going to know if Henry Cejudo decides to retire. Trust me, he is going to post it on social media and he is going to let you know. And I think that a lot of people thought it was disrespectful and like Henry Cejudo is a legend, but he did already retire on top after a win. And now he chose to come back. Who's to say he doesn't choose to come back? Who's to say that he's in the emotional state to retire right now? He's proven to you once that he hasn't stuck to it, right? What if he does decide to fight again? What if he wants to retire going out with just a win or something like that? I kind of agreed with Dana. This was Merab's moment, and trust me, Henry Cejudo is going to let you know. Like, he's going to make a deal out of it on social media, all that stuff when he retires. So it ain't like you're going to miss out on some sort of announcement. I kind of agreed with Dana White in this regard. You know what I mean? I think that Cejudo, thinking about his competitive mindset, like, is he going to want to leave a stain on his record as the last, especially when you're still competitive? Or do you want to go pick up a win and kind of ride off into the sunset that way and put that cap on your career, like end that career with a W? So I can understand Dana White's perspective completely, and the fact that he did already retire once, all that stuff. So I don't know. I didn't think it was the worst thing in the world that they didn't give Cejudo the mic. Anyway, next fight. Who else? Robert Whittaker versus Paulo Costa. This was a great fight, and I'll tell you what, man, just another reminder of how good Whittaker is, right? I was kind of worried because you saw Dricus du Plessis, I felt like, in his fight against Whittaker, he just kind of bullied him. And I was worried that Costa might be able to do that to Robert, but nah, Whittaker's just fucking too technical, too smooth, man. But that wheel kick that Costa caught him with at the end of the first round, I thought Whittaker was going out, no doubt, because Costa also has big power, and when he has an opportunity like that where he hurt you and you're backing up against the cage, he has potential to land some real bombs. And I know it was short time left in the round, but for Whittaker to stay composed, get back to the stool, rebound, and come in and do what he did in rounds 2 and 3, I mean, Robert Whittaker is a fucking gangster, man. He just sticks to the game plan. That's what I mean. And he's gotten caught in his career and he's gotten beat, but he's shown you time and time again that he is amongst the division's elite. He's one of the best in the world. And it's going to be interesting to see if he can battle back up into title contention, right? Because I feel like personally he's probably got to win one more before that happens, just because you've got Izzy waiting in the wings. He's got beef with Dricus, but we'll see. We'll see how that ends up playing out. But that was probably, honestly, the best fight of the main card in terms of like competitiveness, because you jump to Garry versus Jeff Neal, and Garry, man, say what you want, the kid can fight. And Jeff Neal, I should have known looking back at this, it makes perfect sense. Like, it's very logical why the fight played out this way. But you forget that Jeff Neal, I was focusing more on the fact, like, when in the last podcast, he kind of sits down on his punches, and I thought he might be able to catch Garry in the pocket with some big shots, and it just didn't really play out that way. You forget that Jeff, like, bounces around a lot when he moves. He has this very, like, boom, 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 like side to side, back and forth. He's in and out a lot. And Garry obviously wants to hold the space or control the space and the distance, so he's going to be moving a lot. And as a result, there just wasn't a lot of volume. And when Jeff Neal did get into the clinch, I thought that he was able to maybe hold Garry there for a little bit, but he didn't really do anything of significance with it. And Garry did great off the break in those situations and did good at eventually getting back to space. Jeff Neal did land a couple of really nice shots on him, right, that kept snapping the head of Ian Garry back. But overall, this was a weird fight because honestly, I can see it both ways. I can understand how you thought Jeff Neal won the fight, how you could have given him 2 rounds, but I also think that you could have given Ian Garry every single round. I don't think there's anything. It was a weird fight, man. And it's very subjective on what you're going to give, what moments mattered most. Like, were the moments that Jeff Neal was able to create important enough to overtake the control that Ian Garry was demonstrating? Like, you know what I mean? So I think it's very complicated to score fights like that, and I don't think you can get upset with how it goes. But I think that you could have given every single round to Ian Garry, and I personally did. I thought that he just, for the most part, was picking Neal apart, and Neal was catching him with some nice shots. Maybe Garry backing up, leaving his head up a little bit, but nothing that was really hurting Garry. He was getting out of the way of them enough that it wasn't really hurting him. So how much credit do you give it, Yeah, it looks effective, but overall, I thought Garry just put on a fucking surgical performance and did what he was supposed to do. And now he's calling out Colby Covington, and that'll be an interesting fight to see if he can deal with the pace and the wrestling, because it's going to be a different style fight than Jeff Neal, obviously, right? And if you're Garry, we're talking about the timing thing. This is what you're trying to do. You're trying to time guys that are coming off losses, and you're trying to catch them at this point in their career where your point in your career where you're riding a high. You got to play the game, man. And a lot of the times you see these prospects come up and make it through, not only because they're talented, like O'Malley's a great example, and Ilia's a great example, but also because the matchups and the timing and their decision-making, they're getting to a championship level because of all these other factors. This is where the professional aspect comes in. And Ian Garry's a professional. Say what you want about all of his fucking personal life and shit, but if you're looking at his career in the octagon, I'm liking the direction it's going in. Before I forget, first fight on the main card to open things up. Fluffy Hernandez is an animal, man. He just has nonstop, relentless forward pressure. And for Roman Kopylov, he did decent in the first round, right? But you have got to consistently, when Fluffy's attacking you, you have got to be able to make frames, turn and face him, create separation, and find a way, again, to separate and create distance between you and him. Even if you're not getting taken down, the longer that he's pinning you up against the cage, the worse and worse it gets for you, right? He chains things together, and then even if you do manage to separate, he immediately gets back on the legs. Like, you'll see him throw maybe 1-2 up top and then back to the legs. Like, he pounces on those takedowns, and he just comes with it relentlessly, and I love the game plan from him. But if you're going to stop something like that, you've got to be able to create distance. You've got to be able to stuff it and then circle your back off the cage before he enters in again and puts you in that same position. Dealing with that over and over and over again, man, it's a lot. You don't want to constantly be on the defensive. You have to find a way to defend relatively quickly, and then put yourself back in a position where you can throw offense. If not, John Danaher talks about this in jiu-jitsu, you get caught in defensive cycles. And when you get caught in a defensive cycle and it just starts to, again, snowball, right? And now you're just always on defense. It's really fucking tiring. And you've got to be able to turn the tide. And Kopylov wasn't able to do that, man. His striking, I think, if he would have been able to stay out of distance, he probably would have beat Hernandez. But you've got to be able to deal with that pressure. And on the flip side, that's what Fluffy's so good at, is he stays in offensive cycles. Like, he is constantly offensive. He's constantly attacking you with things. And even if it's not successful, it's just the threat of it over and over and over again. It eventually gets to a point where he just breaks you down. And fucking great performance from him. I think I'm going to try to get a breakdown on that one because it was, again, an impressive performance, man. He's the guy to watch out for. On the prelims, how about Amanda Lemos versus Mackenzie Dern? Say what you want about Mackenzie, but she is an animal, right? Like, she is very tough. Took a lot of damage in this fight, but man, she has got to fix the striking. It's reminiscent of Ronda Rousey a little bit, some of the holes in her game, maybe a little bit cleaner, right? And she connects a little bit more. Like, she'll throw wild and Mackenzie will connect. But she needs to find, you got to understand, like Mackenzie, if it goes to the ground, as exchanges start to play out, she is going to be a better grappler than 99% of the girls that she goes up against, right? Unless she faces like a really strong wrestler maybe, right? But Mackenzie is going to be the better grappler most of the time. Her problem, though, is that she's not able to get the fight in a place where she can dictate it. And the exchanges and because she's not able to get the takedown efficiently, the exchanges on the feet get drawn out, and then her sloppiness starts to get exposed a little bit. And that's why Lemos was able to tag her with so many good shots. And hey, shout out to Amanda Lemos. She can fucking crack. I mean, she throws with some serious power, which is kind of rare to see in the women's division sometimes, and she has it. She has that like game-changing power in her hands. And Mackenzie was almost finished, right? But for Mackenzie Dern, I think that she has to correct things, and she has to really work on her striking. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but you need a more simplistic boxing style approach where you're fighting behind your hands. She gets out over herself, overextends, leaves herself exposed. You need to fight behind your hands, get combinations going, and find a way to level change. And just be competent on the feet enough so that you can give girls trouble, offer up some offense of your own, but use it as a means to an end. This is a means to get to the takedown, right? And take the person down and dictate the terms on which we go to the ground. And also, you do see this with submission guys and jiu-jitsu people in general. When they go to the ground, there's like an excitement you can feel from them because they want to submit. I think, though, that in MMA, that those sort of things can happen. Those snap submit, like those quick submissions that come on sometimes where people throw on, they happen all the time. I'm not saying they don't. But in terms of a game plan, I feel like it's better to be the one dictating the fight on the ground, because if you're a jiu-jitsu guy and you get on top of a guy who's not as good as you, you're going to understand how to pin and position and move through and eventually submit them. But I think Mackenzie Dern needs a lot of work in the boxing department, and I think that she also needs a lot of work in the patience department. Like, we don't have it. You want to hunt these submissions, but you have to understand that if you break a person, the submission's going to be so much easier. And if you don't believe me, look at Anthony Hernandez when he submitted Rodolfo Vieira. Fluffy, who we just talked about. Same thing with Roman Kopylov. That is exactly what Hernandez does. If they had a jiu-jitsu match, I think that obviously Vieira would probably win. Right? Not that Hernandez isn't a good grappler, but it's the fact that he wears on people. You have to be able to do that, be patient, and understand that when you're as talented as Mackenzie is, the submissions will come to you, right? And I think that if she could fix that part of her game plan, you really could see her fight amongst the division's elite and compete for a title, but that has to get fixed. I don't think with her current style and her current approach to striking, it's going to be enough to get to the top of the ladder. I just don't, but I digress. Moving on. Let's just go through some of these prelim cards, right? Or prelim fights, some of the more notable ones. Rogerio de Lima versus Junior Tafa. So Justin Tafa gets hurt, and Justin's little brother, Junior Tafa, steps up on less than 24 hours' notice. And while it was a very commendable thing to do, right? Like, if, again, you're looking at like managing your career intelligently, if I'm the guy managing Junior Tafa, I'm going, dog, no fucking way. No fucking way we are risking you going out there and getting battered on this short of notice just because you want to fill in for a prelim bout on a UFC pay-per-view. Like, yeah, maybe it'll earn you brownie points with the UFC a little bit for stepping in and doing that, but why? What do you ultimately gain from it? And Rogerio de Lima also, Junior has a lot of kickboxing experience, but he's only 5-1 coming into this fight. And Rogerio de Lima has like 30 plus professional fights. And he just tore that leg up of Tafa to the point where, he finished him via leg kick. And it played out exactly how you thought it would. That's what I mean. Like, if I'm the manager, I'm trying not to be involved in this emotionally and look back. Or like, even if I'm Junior and I'm like, what do I stand to gain? I don't know if the risk was worth the fucking reward. Like, maybe if you clip them, you win. But I would just think, I would want time to prepare for a guy like De Lima, who's very talented, right? And if, again, you're just risking your health. Like, this fight, in a lot of ways, could have been so much worse. Like, I feel like, obviously, brain damage is the worst kind of damage you can take in a fight. And Tafa's lucky that it was just his leg that got beat up. Like, what if the Lima just battered him and wrestled him and beat his face up over the course of the round, and he's tough enough to just stay with it because he's got that fucking crazy, whatever, I don't know, fucking Maori, I don't know what he is, but some type of fucking, that blood in him, you know what I mean? How the fuck? How the fuck are you, I don't know. I just did not think it was a smart move to take this fight. Anyway, Rinya Nakamura versus Carlos Vera. I missed this fight. I did not get to see it, but I see that Nakamura picked up a unanimous decision. Zhang Mingyang versus Brenson Ribeiro. This was an interesting one because Mingyang got poked in the eye, and then the ref didn't stop it, and he just unloaded the combination and put Ribeiro out cold. So, yeah, that was an interesting one. I'm just obviously reading down these in reverse order now. Danny Barlow, this was a super impressive performance against Josh Quinlan, who is definitely a dangerous guy, but Barlow just looked so precise, and also throughout the fight, just really in control. Measured the distance really well, and caught Quinlan coming in with that left hand and then followed up to get the finish. Beautiful performance from Danny Barlow. Guy coming off the Contender Series. I think he's somebody to be excited about. Oban Elliott versus Val Woodburn. Man, this is one of those fights where I watch and Val Woodburn has that power and that explosiveness. But in terms of, again, just fight IQ, experience, he's got to go back to the regional scene and get some wins. He's strong. You got to let that power come through a little bit, but I think that he's got to round out his game a little bit more before he's ready to compete at the UFC level. And he stepped in and fought Bo Nickel, and I think the UFC probably rewarded him with another UFC fight. But if you're just being honest, if I'm analyzing his talent, I think the regional scene would do his career a lot of good. Where, again, you're picking up more winnable fights and getting ready for the point in your career where you can compete with guys at the UFC level. So it's like moving backwards sometimes ultimately might be better, because in the UFC, you're going to keep getting quality, high-level, world-class opponents. And I think for Val Woodburn, he's the guy who has to build that skill a little bit more. So just my thoughts. Oban Elliott looked good, though. Used his jiu-jitsu a lot to control the fights. Was able to survive some of those big shots that Woodburn threw. And then first fight, again, I know I went in reverse order, but Miranda Maverick picked up a decision over Andrea Lee after I felt like a pretty strong first round from Andrea Lee, but Maverick, man, just dominated. So big win for her. Last thing I want to talk about before we close this out, how about the UFC 300 announcement? Jamahal Hill versus Alex Pereira. And it's a good fight. If you look at it on paper, the UFC's light heavyweight division is one of the flagship divisions. You got two guys who are most likely going to stand and trade with each other. Jamahal Hill is a good boxer, has some serious knockout power in his hands, and he's going to come from sort of unorthodox angles. And that might present a little bit of danger for Pereira. Again, a guy who has been knocked out now by Stylebender in MMA. He's got a knockout loss on there too, so you know that you can do it. You know that you can put him to sleep. And if you're Jamahal Hill, you're thinking, if I can get my hands on this guy, I might be able to finish the fight. And in terms of skill and kickboxing, again, you look at it on paper, and Pereira is probably the favorite in that department. And he has some serious power as well, some real knockout power that you got to be careful of. So I think this is a fucking really good matchup. But is it UFC 300 material? Man, there's just not the hype around these. There's just not the hype and the storyline and the background behind these two guys like there are other. I don't know, and I don't know. I just thought that it was going to be a bigger announcement. Like I said, don't get me wrong. It's a great fight. I'm excited for it. I'm going to watch. 300 is still a great card. If you're looking at the overall quality of the UFC 300 card, it's amazing. It's a great fucking card. But the headliner, I don't know, man. I was hoping, honestly, one of the things that I was really hoping for would be something like Leon versus fucking Islam. You know what I mean? And I'm wondering now, I don't know. I'm wondering now if the three opponents that were offered to Leon Edwards were Shavkat Rakhmonov, Khamzat Chimaev, and Islam Makhachev. Is that crazy to think? Because I'm trying to figure out who the other third one would be in that division. Usman doesn't make sense to me. Right, he's coming off a loss to Chimaev. He didn't make sense. Gilbert Burns is fighting De La Maddalena coming up soon, and that's not a big enough fight. He just beat Colby Covington. Bilal, in my opinion, is not a big enough name to headline 300. So it makes me think that it was like they were maybe thinking a super fight between Islam and Leon. And Leon said yes, but all of those guys, because of Ramadan, UFC 300 is not lining up well for some of the current champions. So I think that's probably a lot of the issues that the UFC was running into as well. But like I said, a little bit of a letdown in terms of like the excitement factor. Great fight at UFC 300. You still got a great fucking lineup. But yeah. Anyway, that's going to wrap this one up, guys. I know, again, I'm a little bit late getting this one out, but just wanted to talk about some of the stuff. And again, I think I'm going to do a breakdown on that Fluffy Hernandez submission, like just kind of walking through the fights and kind of digging into that pressure and how he's constantly level changing and shit. So keep an eye out for that. But otherwise, guys, have a great day. Enjoy it. Subscribe if you enjoyed, comment, all that good shit. And yeah, I'll catch you guys next time. Bye-bye.